Brazil, 1931. At warehouses, rail yards and ports, sacks of coffee are being opened, condemned and destroyed. Not because the beans are rotten, not because they are unsafe, but because there is too much coffee and it is worth too little. The Great Depression has crushed global demand. Brazil has spent decades expanding plantations, railways, ports, and credit around a single export. Now the crop that helped build the country is threatening to bankrupt it. So the government makes an extraordinary decision. It will remove coffee from the market to prevent the price from falling further. Some of it is burned, some is dumped, some is converted into fuel or destroyed by other means. By 1944, Brazil will have eliminated roughly 78 million 60-kilogram bags, an amount equivalent to about 3 years of global coffee exports at the time. Think about what that means. Coffee has become so important that a government is willing to destroy mountains of it in order to preserve its value. A drink that began as the seed of a forest plant is now tied to national debt, employment, foreign exchange, railways, banks, and political power. And that raises a question far larger than coffee itself. How did a plant from the forests of East Africa become valuable enough for empires to seize, governments to manipulate, and millions of workers to depend on, yet ordinary enough to sit beside your alarm clock every morning? The answer is not a simple story of discovery. It is a story about controlling scarcity first. People controlled the plant, then they controlled the land, then they controlled the labor, and eventually they learned to control the price, the brand, and even the meaning of the cup itself. This is the history of coffee. But more than that, it is the history of the empire behind your morning cup. Coffee is often described through numbers. How many cups are consumed? How many cafés exist? How much the industry is worth? But those figures change depending on what is being counted. Raw beans, roasted coffee, cafés, equipment, retail beverages, or the entire hospitality economy. One famous claim says coffee is the second most traded commodity in the world after oil. It is repeated constantly, but there is no reliable global ranking that supports it. What can be said with confidence is still remarkable. The United Nations Food and Agriculture Organization describes coffee as the world's most widely traded tropical product. Up to 25 million farming households depend on it, and smallholders produce roughly 80% of the world's coffee. That means your cup begins long before a barista, a pod, or a supermarket shelf. It begins with land, rainfall, labor, credit, and risk. It passes through farmers, collectors, mills, exporters, shipping companies, commodity traders, roasters, distributors, cafés, and brands. Each step adds value, but not every step receives equal power. To understand how that imbalance formed, we have to travel back before plantations, before coffeehouses, and before the word coffee entered European languages. We have to begin with the plant itself, and we have to separate what can be documented from the stories people later told about it. Long before anyone roasted a coffee bean, coffee Arabica was already the product of an ancient biological accident. Genomic research suggests that Arabica emerged hundreds of thousands of years ago through a natural hybridization between two other coffee species, Coffea canephora and Coffea eugenioides. The event may have occurred somewhere between roughly 350,000 and 610,000 years ago, far earlier than human cultivation. Wild Arabica developed in the highland forests of what is now Ethiopia and neighboring parts of South Sudan. Under a forest canopy, the plant found cool temperatures, seasonal rain and shade. That ecosystem remains important today because wild Ethiopian coffee populations preserve genetic variation that commercial plantations badly need. Then comes the story almost everyone knows. A goat herder named Kaldi notices his animals becoming unusually energetic after eating red berries. He tries them, feels their effect, and carries the discovery to a monastery. It is a perfect origin story. It has an innocent witness, a moment of discovery, a touch of comedy, and a clear beginning. The problem is that historians cannot verify it. The Kaldi story appears in later traditions, not in reliable 9th century records. Coffee's early history is filled with legends created long after the events they claim to describe. This does not mean people in Ethiopia were unaware of the plant. They almost certainly knew and used local coffee species before surviving written accounts described them. But the exact methods, dates, and communities are difficult to reconstruct with certainty. The better documented transformation occurred across the Red Sea. By the 15th century, coffee was being cultivated in Yemen. There, communities developed the plant into a repeatable agricultural and commercial product. Coffee was no longer simply something gathered from a forest. It was planted on terraces, harvested, processed, traded, and consumed as a brewed drink. Yemen's Sufi communities are closely associated with its early use as a stimulant during long nights of prayer and devotion. The port of Al-Makka, known in Europe as Mocha, became one of the most famous names in the early coffee trade. This was coffee's first great transformation. A wild plant became a cultivated crop, a regional practice became a commercial network, and a biological resource became something worth controlling. That control left a genetic legacy. A relatively small number of Arabica plants passed through Yemen and later gave rise to the Typica and Bourbon lineages. Their descendants would eventually dominate much of global Arabica production. The future coffee industry was already carrying a weakness inside it. Its global expansion would depend on a narrow genetic foundation. But before that, weakness became visible. Coffee created something powerful and new. Not a plantation, not a brand, a room full of people talking. By the 16th century, coffee houses were spreading through cities of the Ottoman Empire. Istanbul, Cairo, Aleppo, Damascus, and other urban centers developed spaces where men could drink coffee, hear news, play games, listen to stories, conduct business, and discuss public affairs. These were not modern cafés with headphones and laptop screens. They were crowded institutions of urban life. Information moved through them. Reputations were made inside them. Rumors, poetry, commercial intelligence, religious debate, and political criticism could all circulate beyond the direct supervision of the palace or the mosque. Historians have described the coffeehouse as one of the defining social inventions of the early modern Ottoman city, a civic meeting place that spread across a vast region, that made coffee politically complicated. The problem was not simply caffeine. The problem was congregation. A ruler could control a proclamation. It was much harder to control hundreds of conversations happening at the same time. Authorities periodically restricted coffeehouses, often combining concerns about public order, morality, religious practice, and political dissent. Sultan Murad IV, who ruled in the 17th century, became especially associated with harsh crackdowns in Istanbul. Later retellings turned him into a figure who wandered the streets in disguise and personally executed coffee drinkers. The evidence is stronger for aggressive repression and closures than for every gruesome detail added by later storytellers. What matters is why the stories endured. Coffee had become linked with unsupervised speech. The drink created a public before modern democratic institutions had fully formed. When coffeehouses spread into Europe, that relationship between caffeine and information became even more visible. In London, different coffeehouses developed different professional identities. Merchants gathered in one, writers and publishers favored another. Sailors, ship owners, brokers, and underwriters gathered at Edward Lloyd's Coffeehouse, where reliable shipping information had direct financial value. That establishment eventually gave its name to Lloyd's of London. At Jonathan's Coffeehouse, traders circulated prices for stocks and commodities. In 1698, price information associated with Jonathan's helped form part of the institutional history that eventually led to the London Stock Exchange. Coffee did not single-handedly create capitalism, it did not cause the Enlightenment, and it did not automatically make societies more rational. But coffeehouses helped build an infrastructure in which information could be exchanged more quickly, more regularly, and among wider groups of people. The first empire coffee built was an empire of conversation. Yet Europe had a problem. Its coffeehouses were multiplying faster than its control over the crop. The drink could be imported. The knowledge could be copied. but the living plant was still concentrated far from the European centers of consumption. To make coffee abundant and profitable on an imperial scale, European powers needed more than beans. They needed territory. A roasted coffee bean can be sold once. A living coffee plant can reproduce an industry. That difference transformed coffee into an object of imperial science. European trading companies and colonial governments were not merely buying exotic products. They were collecting plants, seeds, cultivation knowledge, maps, weather observations, and information about soil. Botanical gardens became laboratories of empire. A plant acquired in one region could be studied, propagated, and transferred to another region where land and labor were easier to control. Coffee's spread is often told through heroic smuggling stories. A Dutch trader steals a plant from Yemen. A French officer protects a fragile seedling during a dangerous Atlantic crossing. A Portuguese agent receives coffee seeds hidden in a bouquet from a governor's wife. These stories may preserve fragments of real plant transfers, but later retellings often turned complex imperial programs into adventures centered on one daring European man. The larger mechanism was less romantic. European empires possessed naval routes, chartered companies, botanical networks, colonial administrators, military force, and legal claims over other people's land. Coffee moved through that machinery. The Dutch established coffee cultivation in Java, part of present-day Indonesia. The island became so closely identified with the commodity that Java eventually became a nickname for coffee in English. But the significance of Java was not linguistic. It demonstrated that coffee production could be detached from its original ecological and cultural setting and rebuilt inside a colonial export system. Coffee plants were also transferred into the Caribbean and northern South America. In colonies such as Suriname and Saint-Domingue, plantation owners combined tropical land with enslaved labor and access to European markets. Coffee was no longer scarce because it could grow in only one region. It was scarce because empires controlled where it could be planted, who could work the land, and where the harvest could be sold. The Dutch system in Java became especially revealing after 1830. Under the cultivation system, colonial authorities compelled many Javanese villages to devote land or labor to export crops, including coffee. The products flowed toward the Netherlands. The risks remained in Java. Colonial revenues helped support the Dutch state, while local households absorbed the pressure of quotas, labor demands, crop failure, and reduced control over their own land. This is the moment coffee became fully imperial. It was no longer simply traded between regions. It was produced through political hierarchy. The consumer encountered a cup. The merchant encountered a cargo. The colonial government encountered revenue. The laborer encountered an order. And because the violence of production took place thousands of miles from the table where coffee was consumed, the two realities could be kept psychologically separate. In Europe, coffee could represent refinement, alertness, discussion, and progress. On the plantation, it could mean surveillance, quotas, punishment, and exhaustion. The more successful the system became, the easier it was for consumers to forget the second reality. Coffee was becoming cheaper, but its low price was not proof that it had become inexpensive to produce. It was proof that someone else had been forced to absorb the cost. Every commodity has two histories: the history told by the people who consume it, and the history lived by the people who produce it. For European consumers, coffee became part of a new social world. For enslaved Africans in the Caribbean and Brazil, it became another crop organized around forced labor. Coffee plantations expanded in Suriname, Saint-Domingue, and other colonies within Atlantic systems already shaped by slavery. Enslaved people cleared land, planted trees, removed weeds, harvested cherries, processed beans, maintained roads, and transported the crop. The plantation did not simply use labor. It attempted to control every part of a person's life in order to convert human time into export revenue. Saint-Domingue became one of the richest plantation colonies in the Atlantic world. Its wealth depended on an exceptionally violent system of racial slavery. The Haitian Revolution did not begin because of coffee alone, but it overthrew the social order that had made both coffee and sugar fortunes possible. The plantation economy looked efficient only because it refused to count freedom, family separation, violence, illness, and death as economic costs. In the 19th century, the center of coffee production shifted increasingly toward Brazil. Coffee cultivation expanded through regions connected to Rio de Janeiro, the Paraíba Valley, São Paulo, and later Minas Gerais. Its growth was deeply entangled with slavery. Historical scholarship on Brazilian slavery places coffee plantations among the central environments in which enslaved labor expanded during the 19th century. Workers cleared Atlantic forest, prepared hillsides, tended trees for years before they produced a full crop, picked cherries by hand, carried heavy loads, and spread beans across large drying yards. The finished coffee looked clean, uniform, and tradable. The labor system behind it was anything but clean. Brazil abolished slavery in 1888, later than any other independent country in the Western Hemisphere. But abolition did not instantly create an equal labor market. Plantation owners still controlled land, housing, credit, transport, and access to export networks. New labor arrangements brought immigrants and formerly enslaved people into systems of contracts, debt, share arrangements, and supervision. The legal category changed, many of the economic dependencies remained. Research on the formation of modern Brazil shows that coffee's labor-intensive and environmentally destructive plantation model continued to influence the country after abolition, including through the Colonial labor system and state support for coffee producers. Java followed a different legal structure, but a related economic logic. Many Javanese farmers were not chattel slaves, yet colonial authorities could still use taxation, village obligations, land rules, and administrative coercion to direct their labor toward coffee, intended for distant consumers. This distinction matters. Not every form of exploitation is identical, but different systems can produce a similar result. The people doing the most physically demanding work possess the least control over the crop's price and destination. That imbalance became one of coffee's most durable features. When prices rose, landowners, exporters, traders, and governments could capture large gains. When weather damaged a harvest or prices collapsed, workers and small producers had far fewer ways to protect themselves. They could not store coffee indefinitely. They could not easily switch crops after years invested in coffee trees. They often borrowed money before the harvest, and they rarely controlled the information that determined the price. Coffee became an extraordinary machine for moving value. But the machine did not move value evenly. It moved beans from tropical farms toward wealthy consumer markets. It moved revenue toward landowners, commercial houses, shipping companies, and financial centers. And it moved risk downward. That system helped make coffee affordable enough to become a daily habit. The cheap cup was never simply the result of better technology. It was also the result of cheapened land, cheapened labor, and costs kept out of sight. Brazil would take this system further than any previous producer. It would not merely grow coffee, it would build railways, political alliances, credit systems, and government policy around it. Coffee was about to become a state. Coffee trees are fixed in the ground, markets are not. That simple problem shaped modern Brazil. As plantations moved deeper into the interior, producers needed a faster way to reach the port of Santos. Railways connected coffee regions with export terminals, shortening transport times and opening new land to commercial cultivation. British engineers and investors participated in important railway projects, while coffee expansion provided both the economic justification and the freight that made many routes valuable. Railways did more than transport beans. They increased land values. They encouraged migration. They linked plantation regions to banks and ports. They allowed coffee wealth to reshape cities. And they strengthened the political influence of the regions that controlled the crop. During Brazil's First Republic, political power became heavily concentrated among elites in the coffee, producing Southeast, even though the familiar phrase coffee with milk politics can oversimplify the alliances involved. The state and the coffee economy became increasingly difficult to separate. But coffee had a built-in danger. A coffee tree takes years to mature. Farmers make planting decisions based on today's prices, but the resulting crop enters the market years later. When high prices encourage many producers to plant at once, supply can eventually exceed demand. Then prices collapse. Each producer has an incentive to keep harvesting because they still need income. Collectively, that makes the oversupply worse. By the beginning of the 20th century, Brazil produced such a large share of the world's coffee that falling prices threatened not only individual plantations, but public finances and political stability. In 1906, coffee-producing states launched a policy commonly known as valorization. The basic idea was to defend prices by purchasing or financing surplus coffee and keeping it off the market. The state would borrow money, store coffee, and wait for conditions to improve. Scarcity would no longer be left to nature. It would be manufactured through policy. For a time, the system helped, but it also encouraged continued production. The more successfully the state protected producers from low prices, the more difficult it became to solve the underlying surplus. Then came the crash of 1929. Global consumption weakened. Credit disappeared. Inventories grew. Brazil could not simply persuade millions of consumers to drink enough coffee to absorb the harvest. So the government escalated. It destroyed coffee. By the mid-1940s, approximately 78.2 million bags had been removed and destroyed under Brazil's support programs, roughly 3 years of world exports by contemporary standards. Now the opening image makes sense. Burning coffee was not a bizarre rejection of value. It was an attempt to create value through destruction. The policy exposed a truth hidden inside commodity markets. Price is not produced by supply and demand alone. It can also be shaped by storage, credit, quotas, state intervention, market power, and the ability to survive while waiting. Brazil had enough influence to manipulate scarcity. An individual farmer did not, but even Brazil could not permanently control a global market by itself. After war, depression, and repeated price crises, producer and consumer countries searched for a larger solution. Coffee's next empire would be built not around a colony or a single nation, but around an international agreement. By the 20th century, coffee had become an industrial habit. Large roasters bought beans from multiple origins, blended them for consistency, packaged them under national brands, and used advertising to make coffee part of the expected rhythm of daily life. The origin of the bean mattered less than the reliability of the product. The consumer was not purchasing Ethiopia, Colombia, Brazil, or Java. The consumer was purchasing a familiar label. Industrial processing made coffee easier to distribute, but it did not solve the recurring conflict between producers who wanted higher prices and consuming countries that wanted stable, affordable supply. The first international coffee agreement was negotiated in 1962 and entered into force in 1963. Its central tool was a system of export quotas. When prices were weak, participating countries could limit exports. The aim was to reduce extreme volatility and create a more predictable market for both producers and consumers. The system operated, with interruptions and renegotiations, until 1989. It was not a perfect system. Countries argued over quota shares. New producers challenged older allocations. Different varieties and quality levels complicated negotiations. Consumer governments and producer governments did not always agree on what a fair price meant, but the agreement recognized something important. A market made up of millions of farmers could not be stable if every producer was forced to sell into a price collapse without coordination. In 1989, negotiations failed to produce a new quota arrangement. The system was suspended. Coffee entered a more liberalized global market for producers. That meant greater exposure to international price swings. For large traders and roasters, scale, storage, financing, blending, and market information offered forms of protection that an individual farmer rarely possessed. At almost the same time, a different transformation was changing how wealthy consumers understood coffee. The specialty coffee movement had begun developing in North America by the late 1960s. It borrowed language from wine. Origin mattered, altitude mattered, variety, processing method, Roast profile, acidity, sweetness, and terroir became part of the consumer vocabulary. Starbucks did not invent this movement. Its first store opened in Seattle in 1971 as a seller of beans and equipment. Howard Schultz's experience in Milan in 1983 helped inspire the company's later emphasis on the Italian-style coffeehouse. And from 1987, the business expanded under a new model centered on the cafe experience. The company's influence was enormous. CIT helped turn coffee from an inexpensive household staple into a customizable experience. The cup could now communicate taste, identity, lifestyle, and status. Independent roasters and cafés pushed in other directions, emphasizing traceability, lighter roasting, farm identity, and direct relationships. Consumers learned the names of regions that had once disappeared inside blends. Yirgachefwala, Antigua, Minas Gerais. The language of origin returned, but a more detailed story about the farmer did not automatically give the farmer more power. The greatest increases in retail value often appeared where branding, roasting, real estate, service, and customer experience were concentrated. The producer still faced weather, plant disease, debt, and volatile prices. Coffee had moved from an age of colonial flags into an age of supply chains. The empire was harder to see. It no longer needed a governor's palace. It could operate through contracts, price benchmarks, logistics, market information, and brand recognition. And beneath that modern system was the same plant population that had passed through a narrow genetic bottleneck centuries earlier. Coffee had become globally dominant. Biologically and economically, it remained fragile. Today, coffee connects some of the wealthiest consumer markets in the world, with millions of farming households across tropical regions. Brazil remains the largest producer. For the 2025-26 season, the United States Department of Agriculture projected Brazilian production at approximately 63 million 60-kilogram bags, and Vietnamese production at about 30.8 million, with Vietnam relying heavily on Robusta coffee. Those numbers suggest abundance. The reality at farm level is much less secure. Smallholders produce roughly 4/5 of the global crop, but many have limited access to credit, insurance, storage, market information, or price protection. A farmer may spend years caring for coffee trees before receiving a full harvest. The crop must then be picked within a limited window. Coffee cherries cannot simply remain on the tree until the international price improves. Farmers may need immediate cash to pay workers, repay loans, buy food, or send children to school. That urgency weakens bargaining power. Studies of coffee supply chains in countries such as Uganda and Vietnam have documented low incomes, exposure to price volatility, weak grievance systems, and significant gaps between the economic position of small producers and more powerful actors farther along the chain. Price increases do not automatically solve the problem. In 2024, international coffee prices rose by nearly 40%, driven partly by adverse weather affecting major producing countries. Higher prices can benefit some farmers with a strong harvest and access to the market, but a price spike caused by crop damage may leave other producers with fewer beans to sell. At the same time, consumers pay more, roasters face higher costs, and smaller businesses may struggle to secure supply. This is why the question is not simply whether coffee prices are high or low. The question is who can survive volatility. Climate pressure makes that question more urgent. Arabica coffee prefers relatively narrow temperature and rainfall conditions. Heat, drought, irregular rain, extreme storms, and shifting disease pressure can make established growing regions less predictable. Farmers can move cultivation uphill only where higher land exists, where forests and ecosystems can be protected, and where farmers have the legal and financial ability to relocate. The biological history of Arabica adds another risk. Because much of cultivated Arabica descends from a limited genetic base, the crop has relatively low genetic diversity. Wild coffee populations in Ethiopia are therefore not merely part of coffee's past. They may contain traits essential to its future. Labor remains another hidden cost. Most coffee is not produced under identical conditions. and it would be misleading to treat every farm or country the same. Some cooperatives and farms have improved wages, traceability, safety, and farmer participation. Others operate in regions where poverty, informal employment, migrant vulnerability, or weak enforcement create serious risks. The United States Department of Labor continues to identify coffee from multiple producing countries among goods associated with child labor or forced labor concerns. Labels can help consumers ask better questions. Certification can establish standards. Long-term purchasing relationships can reduce uncertainty. Higher quality markets can sometimes provide premiums. But no logo can automatically repair an unequal supply chain. A resilient coffee economy requires more than consumer goodwill. It requires incomes that allow farmers to invest rather than merely survive. It requires enforceable labor protections. It requires access to finance without predatory debt. It requires transparent contracts, stronger producer organizations, climate adaptation, crop research, forest conservation, and a larger share of value remaining where coffee is grown. The central imbalance has survived every era of coffee history. The people closest to the plant often carry the greatest physical and environmental risk. The people closest to the consumer often possess the greatest power to shape price, language, and perception. Coffee's modern empire does not look like the Dutch East India Company. It does not look like a Brazilian plantation baron. It does not look like a warehouse full of government-owned sacks. It looks like a supply chain. And because supply chains are fragmented, every participant can claim that the worst outcome is someone else's responsibility. The farmer can blame the exporter can blame the benchmark price, the roaster can blame the harvest, the cafe can blame rent and labor costs. The consumer can say the entire system is too complicated to understand. But complexity does not erase responsibility. It only makes responsibility easier to hide. So where did coffee come from? Biologically, from the highland forests of East Africa. Commercially, from cultivation and trade, developed through Yemen. Globally, from an imperial system that transferred plants, seized land, controlled labor, and connected tropical farms to distant consumer markets. Who gained power and wealth from it? Merchants, colonial companies, plantation owners, exporting elites, governments, commodity traders, roasters, retail brands, and millions of ordinary people also gained something real: income, community, ritual, stimulation, pleasure, and connection. But who paid the hidden price? Enslaved workers in the Atlantic world. Javanese farmers compelled to grow colonial export crops. Laborers whose freedom changed more quickly in law than in economic realities. Small producers who still face risks they did not create and prices they cannot control. And why does it still matter? Because the historical structure has not completely disappeared. The names have changed. The contracts have changed. The advertisements have changed. But land, labor, scarcity, information, and bargaining power still decide who benefits most from the cup. Coffee is not guilty. A plant has no politics. A beverage has no morality. The systems built around it do. Tomorrow morning, someone will open a bag, press a button, lift a paper cup, or wait for water to pass slowly through ground coffee. The action will feel private. The history is global. Inside that ordinary routine are forests, ports, revolutions, forced labor, railways, price agreements, advertising campaigns, climate shocks, and millions of human decisions. The cup may take 5 minutes to drink. The system behind it took centuries to build, and the next time drought, disease, or market panic threatens that system, one question will matter more than the price written on the cafe menu. Who will be expected to absorb the loss? The brand, the consumer, or the farmer who had the least power from the beginning? The things we use every day are never just things. Sometimes they are empires we have learned not to see.